What leads to nihilism? Scientific thinking. Objectification. How? It flattens relationships in the world by removing intimacy. Stay tuned to learn more. Now, when I say scientific thinking, what am I talking about? Science very much reduces the world to objects. And what happens with that is, because the world isn't actually made of objects, I'll get into that later, is that we start thinking about the world differently and trying to encompass more of it in our head and thinking about it incorrectly. The world is not made of objects. You can think of the world in terms of objects for very specific purposes, with lots of framing and tons of assumptions. And then you can do science, right? You can use things like logic, reason, and rationality, all of which are linear and discrete processes. I'll get into that. And that removes or flattens a bunch of aspects of the world, right? Down to linear and discrete components, which science deals with well. Unfortunately, you can't understand most of the world and any of the important parts of the world using science and scientific methods. So when we think of the world as containing objects, we'll say, that are just kind of there, we talk more in nouns than in verbs, right? We talk more as if there are things and then there are actions. But really, we should speak in terms of actions, and maybe actions in the future, right? Potential actions, or desired actions, right? Preferable outcomes, preference, right? And less about objects. When we start discussing things as objects, we demote the relationships between objects down to properties, and those properties come from the object. They emanate, if you will, outward from the perspective of the object, right? That's objectivity. That's what it is, irrespective of other definitions you may understand. And so that is the thing that allows the relationship. What relationships are allowed? Oh, we call those properties. But that's a very poor way to think of the world, unless you're doing something very specific, right? With science, for example. Then the scientific tools, logic, reason, rationality, things like hypotheses and tests, testability, all that comes into play. If you're not doing that, though, you're not going to science love or care, which is a better word. You're not going to science desire. It's not going to happen. You may come up with correlations for desire that are based in materiality, but you haven't explained anything. You've just stated a correlation. You've given a description. That's because the science can't do these things. It can't help you to understand the most important pieces. But also note what else is going on. Properties are attached, or maybe they're qualities of objects all of a sudden. But objects are really hard to define. And Jordan Peterson talks about this. I'm hoping to do another animation about this. Jordan Peterson talks about this. If you're walking through the woods and you see and you want to sit down, you start looking for things you can sit on. You don't see a tree stump, you see a sitting place, right? This is all over the psychological literature, always has been, right? Since there's been psychological literature pretty much, very early days, longer than I've been alive, certainly. That's how we perceive the world. And so we don't perceive tree stumps. Normally when you're walking in the woods, you don't notice tree stumps. You don't know how many tree stumps you passed, because tree stumps don't have an affordance for you. The affordance comes from what you want to do or what you need to do. It doesn't come from the object. That's very much why we were able to manipulate objects to make new things. Take a tree that's fallen down. It's not a fallen tree. It's a bunch of wood to make a chair, or a bunch of wood to burn, or a bunch of wood to make a ladder. It's not a fallen tree. And that's how we get those created things or manifested things that we make, right? Is through our vision of the future potential or the future, quote, affordance, or the way in which we could rearrange the thing into something with discrete, interesting properties that we desire. Now, the other trick here is that we flatten the world and also removed things like higher and lower, right? Because properties are attached to objects and they sort of come from the object or something somehow. That's very much how science thinks about things. Again, I'm not saying you can't use science. Of course you can, right? But that's a flattening of the world, right? And so what you see now is people are talking about, instead of properties, they're talking about affordances. Kind of the same word, actually, right? What properties does it have, right? What affordances does it have? They're talking about, but things emerge. Okay, but you haven't explained how things emerge, right? And by the way, where did they come from, right? Where did the things that allow for emergence come from? That would be a good question to ask first, right? And because we don't do that, because we flatten the world and reduce things to properties, maybe we're upgrading them to affordances, we're not thinking about things in terms of proper relationship. The relationships of science, of properties and affordances for that matter, are more or less linear and discrete. And you could say, but things have multiple affordances. That's still linear and discrete. It's just more linearity and more discrete things. You haven't solved the problem there, right? When you reduce things to linear and discrete, you remove quality of relationship from the world, right? Your ability to qualify the world, right, is reduced. It's not non-existent, right? There's definite an analog between a property or an affordance and a quality of a relationship. That's why it doesn't seem like such a disaster when in fact it is. So that is the removal of intimacy, which I refer to as the intimacy crisis, from the world, right? You're removing it or reducing it, right? Maybe you're not removing all of it because you can't, right? But you're reducing it and leaving all these remainders effectively is what's happening. And so because you can't reduce the quality of a relationship to something linear and discrete, but you're trying, bad things happen, right? And so the way to think about this is this reduction or flattening of relationships becomes directional, right? From the object outwards. Single aspect, it's linear. You have multiple affordances. Okay, you've just said maybe I have 6 linear relationships, but they're still linear relationships. And because there's 6 of them, you've made them discrete. What if they're not? What if they're connected, right? What if the relationships that you're describing as affordances are deeply dependent upon one another as well? That's not linear, and that's not discrete, right? It's more unified, but it is not a unity, because those are different things, all right? And what if each property or affordance is not separate, right? That's the thing. And it requires lots of very specific framing to get things reduced down to properties or even affordances. And they're hiding the framing. And that's sort of the postmodern project, is justify hiding framing everywhere. And then nobody deals with the framing. And then we own the frame because we're wicked smart or something. That's very much what's playing out here. Now it's playing out in science with sciencey people, scientists in particular. And that is very sad. But also that's happening. Good to know. So let's get less abstract. Let's think about, what if you think about people this way? Okay, so maybe I have a girlfriend, and maybe the girlfriend wants me to do some work, right? She wants me to move some rocks. Now, why do I want to move rocks? Right? Oh, moving rocks, who cares? Like, they're rocks. They're fine where they are. They were kind of like there before, and they can just stay there. And maybe it's worse. Like, maybe she wants me to buy rocks and have them dumped in the driveway and then moved in a certain pattern in front of the house. Right? Well, I don't care about rocks in front of the house. Right? So it'll look pretty. I don't care. I just need to know I can get in my house and out of my house, and hopefully without tracking in too much dirt and mud. And maybe if the rocks facilitate that, I can kind of see why you want rocks, but also there's a billion better ways to do that. Don't involve me breaking my back and moving the rocks. So I don't want to do that work. Why do I want to do that work? That work doesn't, like, who cares? Right? But if you do that work and that makes your girlfriend happy, then even though in the moment the work is stupid and pointless and work, right? What's going on? Like, what? This sucks. Then all of a sudden, the work was worthwhile because she smiles and she's happy and she's nicer to you now because you're not a jerk. It's always a plus. So when you treat the rocks as rocks and the moving as moving, without understanding why the rocks might need to be moved in a certain configuration, because this doesn't work if the rocks are moved from a random point to a random point for no reason. Then then moving the rocks is all bad. That's true. That's the scientific problem. When you start from rock and add work, you get nihilism. You get no reason. Why would I do this? I'm just putting in effort and nothing's happening as the result, except I put in a lot of effort, and that's not good. But when you understand the final cause, make final cause great again, everything changes. Everything. It's almost as if the ability for you to understand the goodness of your action happens in reverse time, because it does. Right? It's almost as if moving the rocks being good is not contained within the rocks, within any of the properties of the rocks, with any of the affordances of the rocks, right? But actually is outside of that. And this is true because what if you swap out rocks for something else? Oh, move these seashells here instead. Same configuration though, right? Oh, no, not seashells, not rocks. Make it mulch. Oh, how interesting. The thing you're moving isn't actually all that important to the outcome of the happiness of your girlfriend. And you can be skeptical and cynical and say, well, that's not true. She's going to prefer one over the other. Sure, but there are things that are definitely no, and there are things that maybe she doesn't know would be better, right? But the point still remains. That's not in the thing that you're moving. And it's not in the fact that you moved it. It's in the arrangement that it's moved in, and the reason for it being moved, and the external factors that have nothing to do with the properties or affordances of the object. Having shells next to your house or on your driveway or in your walkway or whatever is very different from having stones, which is very different from having rocks, which is very different from having bricks, which is very different from having mulch. They all have different properties, affordances, right? But more importantly, you have a different quality. And the quality that they have is mediated by the surroundings. And it's mediated by the final cause. Let me give you another example. Let's just suppose that no one likes to cook. Like no one actually likes to cook. And yeah, look, I know some people like really enjoy cooking, but like just walk with me here for a minute, okay? What if, I'm not saying this is true, but I am saying this quite could be true, by the way, right? But either way, I want you to consider it very seriously and not be skeptical and cynical about it. See my video. What if the number of people as a percentage of the population who actually love to cook, we'll say for the sake of cooking, and not for the sake of eating it or feeding other people, for example, is the same ratio as the number of serial killers in the world? Okay? And then you don't like to think about serial killers. Let's not think about the crazy people who just like to cook. Okay? Let's just assume for ease of thought that they don't exist, right? And say, no one likes to cook. And again, I know it's not zero people. Like, I get that. Okay? But what that means is that, well, people are cooking. And you can say, well, they're cooking because they have to eat. Well, sure, but there's a lot of ways to cook. Like, you just cook rice and beans every day. I've done it. I've eaten nothing but rice and beans for a month. That doesn't bother me at all. I'm also a stoic, so that might be why. But cooking will say more elaborate things than need be for somebody else. When you're cooking, you're like, oh, I hate cooking. Cooking's miserable. Ugh, cooking's the worst, right? But then when you see how contented that other person is with your meal, the cooking becomes worthwhile, right? It is suddenly something that brings you joy that didn't bring you joy in the moment when you were doing it, because the outcome hadn't happened. And the outcome is always uncertain, by the way, in the future. There's always some level of uncertainty. You could always screw up your cooking, and then the other person could be upset, or you could be upset. You could cook for yourself and go, this didn't taste good at all. That's happened to me several times. That's possible. And look, the world is made up of lots of different people. I, for example, I don't actually mind cooking. I just see it as a chore, and chores are a thing, right? Like, I'm a stoic, so chores are a thing. You do chores as a stoic. That's kind of what you do. The stoics just chores. The world is chores. Sure. Right. Absolutely. It's one aspect. I rather enjoy cooking breakfast, Sunday brunch in particular, pancakes, sausages, bacon, French toast, waffles, whatever, like all of that all at once. I actually like that. I like that because it's relatively straightforward to cook. I mean, there's some tricks to cooking good pancakes, whatever. This is not a cooking YouTube channel. And I don't think I could express to you how I do it in a way that people will say, right? Or the fact that I'm able to do it at all. I don't think I can communicate that through propositions anyway. That should be a hint. But the quality of the relationship that happens when I cook that kind of food, partly because I do a good job at that particular type of food. I can cook lots of things, but that particular type of food, I think I really excel at. That is the thing that allows me to enjoy it. I don't necessarily enjoy it while I'm doing it, and I certainly don't enjoy cleaning it up. But the fact that everybody got stuff out of it and my work actually went towards improving a relationship, sometimes just with myself, because I cook a mean French toast, I'm just telling you right now, is important, right? And that makes the work worthwhile. Okay? When you don't see the work as worthwhile, you could be right. You could be doing useless work, right? You could be moving a pile of rocks from one point to another, or moving a hole, as they call it in the military, right? I want you to move that hole, right? That can happen, right? But not everything's like that. Very few things that you do are actually like that. Usually, if you're doing work, you're at least learning something. You're coming to know through participation, which is a better way to know things by actually doing them, something about all the things you're interacting with and the way you're doing it. Hopefully you're paying attention, right? You're learning things like, oh, when I pick up boxes correctly, it hurts less, right? Things like that. So everything has that that ability to teach you, right? And when you don't think of the world that way, all work is pointless. It's nihilistic. There's no reason why that work should be done, because that is true if you change your time frame enough. There's no reason, right? Because if you change your time frame to heat death of the universe, there's no reason. The problem with that thesis is that what if the heat death of the universe doesn't happen if we keep building our world? If we keep putting energy in somehow, I don't know how, I'm just saying, science doesn't account for that. Kind of string theory sort of maybe does or could, but I despise string theory with every fiber of my being. So no. That is the problem with nihilism. It makes a bunch of assumptions and changes the time frame, and you don't know you're doing that to yourself. But you're doing that to yourself, by the way. Or, I mean, maybe other people are showing you the way to do that, putting your attention at it. You should avoid those people. That's the solution to that, right? People who speak negatively about the world, like, you have no agency. Yeah, you should avoid those people. I don't care if they think they're kidding or it's funny to you. You should avoid those sorts of signals, right? If people tell you, like, oh, well, the Illuminati run the world, or it's the lizard people are still my favorite. You should avoid those people, right? I mean, there are conditions. I mean, I use this all the time, and usually when I'm being hyperbolic and it's extremely absurd, I will say, yes, it's clearly the lizard people, right? But like in general, if people are using that sort of constant drumbeat, you should avoid those people, right? They're trying to enchant you with nihilism, with their nihilism. They're externalizing their internal nihilism. And I know it's very hard to see, and you don't want to believe people are like that, but also people are like that, and you should avoid them. And there's a lot more of them now than there used to be. And it doesn't matter how few of them there are. You just need to avoid all of them and be able to spot that, right? And so basically, causation seems backwards because there's 4 causes, right? Science reduces everything to one cause, posits everything as an object, doesn't tell you what assumptions it's making to do that, because there are a lot of them, and that would take too long, effectively. And with that, we can do wonderful things, right? Absolutely. We can build cheap computers. I love computers. I love electronics in general, right? There's all kinds of buildings we can build that we couldn't build before. There's refinements to concrete. The Romans had concrete, by the way. Just saying. Without any of your fancy science. Just saying. We can figure out how to build beautiful buildings. Of course, the Gothic cathedrals were built without any of this fancy science, and almost none of the math, by the way. That should be a hint as to how these things work. Not through science, just to let you know. Discoveries are made first, then observations, then the science begins. You have something new and novel, something hasn't been discovered, you can't do science on it, right? That's just, sorry, it's just the way it works. It's part of all the axiomatic assumptions you make to do science, all the framing that you put in to do science, all relies on observation, all of it. So if a thing hasn't happened, you can't do science on it. If it's only happened once, you can't do science on it, right? You got to have multiple, repeatable, observable effects. Then you can come up with ideas. Then you can come up with ideas and ways to test them. Then you have a hypothesis. Then you need to test the hypothesis, right? Then you have hopefully multiple hypotheses, and they get sort of battle royale, and the one that survives the longest becomes a theory. Brett Weinstein talked about this years ago. I don't know what video it's on, but that's the correct way to do science, and things that aren't science. There's something else going on there, and you should know that. the way to fix this problem is to, quote, re-enchant the world for yourself or for others, if such a thing is possible. And I believe in some cases it can be. It just takes a lot of work. By getting people to understand that final cause is important, right? Or telos, it's another word for it. And the reason why it's important is because it explains all of the connections between things in a way that you can participate. Science doesn't allow for participation. Science is merely description and explanation. I need to know how I fit in. Why do I go to work? If it's just to get a paycheck, I am in a lot of trouble. Paychecks aren't objects in the world. Paychecks are a statement that you have done work and that work had value, and now that value is transferable to other things. So it allows for specialization. That's what currency, all currencies are fiat, by the way. See my videos on these things. I have economy and money videos. They're short. You'll like them. Now you can specialize, right? Not everybody has to own a farm to eat. That's handy. Right? That's nice. I don't think I know how to run a farm. I wouldn't be able to eat, right? This transportable currency thing, and that allows me to focus on computers, which I'm best at, and then I can get paid for that, right? But that enables a bunch of things, right? Not just eating, but also entertainment, also going on trips, also being with my friends, right? Also maybe, coming up with artistic projects together, right? There's all kinds of things that are enabled. If you look at work as just what you're doing in the moment or the thing you do to get a paycheck, then you've disenchanted the world, you've misunderstood the world, you flatten the world, and you're going to eventually fall into nihilism. And I think the reason why we don't see the nihilism is because it takes a long time sometimes not, but it can take a long time. And it can ebb and flow because things have cycles, including nihilism. You get closer to it, you get further away from it. You get closer to it, you get further away from it, right? We need to re-enchant the world and realize that the quality of the relationships that we have is tied up in the end result of those actions that we're taking in the world. And the troublesome part is that you need to pay attention to why you're doing things and realize that a bunch of things are going to happen that you didn't understand or know about or could not have known about in advance. And some of those things may be bad. This is why it's important to have a good telos, right? Because when you make mistakes or when things happen around you that you didn't intend, because that happens to everybody all the time, whether they realize it or not, it won't be the, quote, end of the world. Right, because you'll have saved up some grace by trying to do the right thing and maybe doing the right thing while the wrong thing also happens, because we do not live in a perfect world. We're still trying to struggle our way through that fact. So we re-enchant the world by recognizing that there are certain qualities of relationships. My close friends, I don't have the same quality of relationship as with my friends. I don't have that same quality of relationship with my friends that I have with my family, right? I don't have the quality of relationship with random people on the street, and I shouldn't. I can't track all that anyway, right? There's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't lead to nihilism. It leads to deep, intimate connections with important people who want the best for you, right? And that can't be a nicey-nicey thing because, as I pointed out, moving the rocks isn't nice when you're doing it. But the end result is nice. And that's what we keep missing. What is the future of this thing? What are the future possibilities or potentials of the actions? And there are lots of actions that have nothing but negative or bad future possibilities. Don't do those, right? Don't constantly say, oh, there's nothing you can do in the world. You're just an NPC. Don't Don't run around saying everybody's LARPing everything all the time. Like, these cannot have positive outcomes in the world. It's not possible, right? And there are too many of those, I would say, and very few things. And they're harder, I would argue. They're much harder. I mean, the reason why people do crazy things is because they're easy, right? It's one of the reasons. I got to do something, right? But don't be thinking you're going to get around it by not doing things in the world, because A, that leads to nihilism, and B, the world changes. And you change too, whether you do things or not. That's called time, right? It's time and entropy. I can't tell the two apart sometimes. So it's not like there's a neutral position, an objective material reality or something that you can stand in to A, avoid doing good, right? Or avoid doing bad, or B, from which to judge the world, because the OMR does not exist. It's not there. You can't do that. It's okay, right? But there are patterns you can follow that are good, right? And you should look into those. So hopefully I've explained how intimacy, paying attention to intimacy, the quality of the relationships you have, connects to your telos, right? Because you're not going to move the rocks in front of the house for yourself because you're lazy and you don't care. At least it's true for me. But because of the quality of relationship I have with somebody else, and look, you do have a quality relationship with yourself, and you do have a quality relationship with others, and those qualities are different, and that's good, right? So hopefully I've linked this stuff together just well enough so that you sort of get a sense for why the intimacy crisis is important, and that is a really good description of what is going on, and that is what leads to the meaning crisis, right? It's the intimacy crisis that leads to the meaning crisis. And another way to think about it is to say the meaning crisis is the thing that we identify that manifests in men, and the intimacy crisis is the thing that we identify that manifests in women, right? And that's not to say that we don't have any intimacy, right? It's just to say that intimacy is broken and we're not thinking about it and we don't understand it because we're trying to think in a very scientific way. I hope this was helpful. Leave me some comments. Let me know how I did. I'm going to find some female somewhere, hopefully a new one, that will talk to me more about this intimacy crisis thing. This is as close as I can come without one. So leave some comments. Let me know if you understood this or what you got out of it. And thank you very much for your time and attention.